we're going to first share a little bit of lived experience. After this, we're going to talk about circles, pyramids, and metaphors to center around the student. And then I'm going to discuss the importance of well-being and the dimensions of well-being, looking at areas where you can maybe develop some activities to support students in their transition as they move to university. So the first thing I'm going to do is we are going to do an activity. And the activity goes like this. Lo primero que quiero que hagan es que cojan un papelito y que escriban muy fácilmente la palabra casita y después quiero que pinten una casita. Voy a darles 20 segundos para esta actividad. Ok. ¿Cómo les fue en el chat? You can write in the chat and tell me how did that go for you, the activity. I think people are still in shock. Thank you, Grace. I bet you either teach Spanish or no Spanish. Anyone else? No copying that. Okay. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. So what if I did? Fair enough. Thank you, though. Thanks. What if what I did was something like this? Lo que vamos a hacer hoy es vas a escribir la palabra casita y vas a pintar una casita. Would have made it a bit easier. Would have you gotten the gist of it? I would have think maybe yes, hopefully. And you would have known that I was asking you to write the word casita and to actually draw a casita, a house, a little house. However, more important than what to do, what I want to do is I want you to tell me how you felt when I started speaking to you, as the majority of you didn't understand me. If you understood, great. That is super awesome. You are super ready for seeing me today. But if you didn't, how did you feel? Someone said confused. I want to know more of the words of how you felt in that moment. Quite lost, okay. Bemused, unsure, alienated. So you thought, oh my goodness, maybe I came to the wrong meeting. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Yes, I can imagine you did feel you were in the wrong call. You switched off, absolutely. I wasn't getting to you because I didn't even ask if anyone spoke Spanish. Thank you for sharing that. That's a little bit of what students feel when they start university, when they come to us, when we first start talking to them. They sometimes feel like this. And I want to share with you now a real comment from a real student that went to university and what their experience was. So yes. This is a very strong statement from a student that had a terrible experience starting university because she wasn't ready. And she felt very alienated, dislocated. Unfortunately for these students, in the university they were at, they didn't get the support they needed to make that transition, and they had a breakdown and had to leave that university and then join another university. But that was an experience that was very shocking for that student. And I think it's quite brave that they managed to get through that and actually go to another university and thrive. Regardless of that, this is how a lot of our students feel when they come to university. And it is really difficult for us to support them if they are not ready. And we are seeing more and more students not ready for the transition to university. This is one of the reasons why I developed the foundation year where I work, to support students in that transition. And within that foundation year, I have a unit, which is academic and professional practice, where they developed the socio-emotional skills to thrive and the academic skills to thrive. But in order to do that, there needs to be a space where they can get to the level that they need to be. And it's quite hard for some students to take ownership of their journey when they don't know what to expect or even how to do that. So I'm going to share with you the first of the three things I'm going to talk about, which is a pyramid, which I am sure you are very aware of. And it, in fact, wasn't a pyramid as it was developed, is now a pyramid, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what we find with the students that come to our campuses, someone has a microphone on, I think, is that sometimes they think that they need to have their growing needs developed, so that they need to be cognitively ready, know how to write an essay, and so on and so forth. But we see that some of the deficiency needs, which are the needs that we need to survive, are not kind of fully developed in those young adults. And that's why they struggle quite a bit. So supporting them in making sure that those, as some people call them, adulting skills, are developed is really, really important. Of course, it's important to do well in your A levels and to do well in your exams and all of those other things. But in the scheme of going to university, even more than getting the grades once you're there, is around being able to exist in that environment, probably for the first time without living at home. You may have moved to a different city. You may never have cooked before. Some students may not know how to use the washing machine, for example. All of those things make a huge impact in those first weeks at university. So making sure that those basic needs and that those kind of adulting skills are developed is really, really important. So focusing perhaps in, I don't know, some of the extracurricular activities that you may have for students in supporting them in developing those skills is quite important. And this includes things like finance, being able to be literate in finance and stuff like that. That's quite important. The second thing that I sometimes find as part of the research is that students don't understand what they can focus specifically on. So one of the tools that I use that in fact changed my life and the way I see things, but I use quite a lot, is the circle of influence and concern, which was something that Covey developed in 1989. Covey was exploring what were the main strengths of high achievers in companies. And he went and he looked at hundreds and hundreds of companies, and he looked at what were those people that were excelling at what they were doing. And what he found is that people that were focusing on the things that they could first control were doing actually better. So the circle of control, influence, and concern that was developed by Covey then was utilized for different purposes. And the concept of this circle is first that we have areas that we can control, which are the things that are within our hands to actually make or change or adapt, like the way we speak to someone, our social media consumption, the way that we behave towards someone else, unless obviously we have some mental health issues. But all of those sort of things that we can control are the things that we should be focusing on. What he says is that then we also have a circle of influence, which is the things that we may be able to have an impact on, but we are not sure. So for example, today I am talking to you and I am very passionate about the student experience. And I am hoping that you're going to leave with a positive message of what to do in where you are. But at the end of the day, I don't know what the impact will be. So I am hoping that there will be an influence, but to what extent, I am not in control of that. And the circle of concern are those things that we actually are worried about, but can do nothing about. And I think that is more prevalent than ever, not only for all of us, but for the current generation. We are bombarded with social media, news from all over the world with all of the atrocities that are going on. And people are really, really worried. And what happens is that if we spend all of our time focusing on the things that we are concerned about, but we cannot control, that will have an impact not only on our well-being, but also on our circle of control, because we will feel that there is nothing around that we can control. So the magic of this circle of control, influence, and concern is to think about what are the things, for example, for your students, what are the things they can control, and to focus on those things. And what Covey found was that people that focus on the things they could control not only would do better, but their circle of influence would grow. So the more you focus on the things you can control, your influence will grow and you will be able to have a better impact on more things, which is quite fascinating because you would have thought it's the opposite. But actually, to focus on the things that you're concerned about, even though they are very important, actually will help you little. So, for example, one of the things that people can do is if they are worried about, the state of the world, they could focus on it, on perhaps volunteering for a charity to do some work locally, something that actually is tangible, that you could feel you're making a difference. And it's the same thing with everything else. For me, learning to focus on the things I could control helped me learn to sleep better, because I could actually, at the end of the day, even though I was worried about things, I could put them on the side and think, okay, there's nothing I can do about this today. It will still be there tomorrow. So actually, I'm just going to focus on what I actually can do. And that really, it literally changed my life and helped me with developing my well-being in my well-being journey. So that's kind of the second one. So we have our pyramid, we have our circle. And now I'm going to introduce you to the metaphor. And this is a metaphor I developed as part of a research project I was doing, looking at the transition of students to university. It was a project called Mind the Gap. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to find out from students what they needed, and from staff what they expected, and try to marry it. And it was actually impossible, because the way that universities sell sometimes their student life, their resources, is actually very much like, you will come here and have the best time of your life, you will make friends for life, and you will thrive in every aspect. And then the students come to university, and actually they find that they have no clue what's going on. They are mid-November, which is our wobble week, we call it, when it's actually really cold, they have to start doing their first assignment. They're missing their parents, if they have parents. And actually, they start thinking, oh my goodness, this is not what I was told university was going to be like. And they sometimes don't have the tools to be able to manage through that wobble. So when I was developing this idea, I actually thought about my international students. I used to work with postgraduate students that were international students. And what I found was that international students were settling to university better. They already had traveled to another country and had the skills to be able to open a bank account, to understand how to function a visa. All of those sort of things that are life skills they already had. So when they came here, they actually felt that they belonged at the university, and they called the university home, whereas the home students weren't doing that. So I developed the tourist metaphor, which actually sees the student as a tourist entering a foreign land. So my university is a foreign land to the student, where they will have to learn first where they're going, how to get there, What language do people speak there? So a little bit of the Spanish I was doing before. Academic language can be quite difficult, especially for students that come from underrepresented backgrounds or first in generation to go to university. They don't have a clue. I have students that have come to me crying because they got in their first assignment in their first year a 58. Now, if you've gone to university, you would know that a 58 is a good mark for a first assignment. It's a 2-2, it's a high 2-2. It means you've done, your work. It's still a lot of work that you can develop and grow, but actually it's a sound mark for your first ever assignment. But actually, they thought that we marked, which we are meant to, but we don't, out of 100. So therefore, 58 was just above pass. So when I explained to them that actually at university, in most universities, 40 is the pass, and a 58 is actually a 2-2, very close to a 2-1, she couldn't believe it. She was so shocked that she'd never known about this. So I always tell my students to think that 70 is the new 100. So if you get 70, that's your first. That means you just got the 100 there. Whatever you do above that, fabulous. If you get into the 80s, you're probably publishable. But that completely changes students' perspective straight away. So that kind of understanding of how marking works at university, what a real essay is like at university, which is completely different from an essay at school for an A level, how referencing works, all of those sort of things are quite important for students to kind of have some knowledge of. I sometimes find that the students that have done the extended project, some schools do that, actually do well in that because they have to carry on some research and they have to use references, and that kind of gets them into the mindset of being at university. But anyway, so yes, the currency that we have at university, the fact that 70 is the 100 really. What is the accommodation like? Some students go to accommodation. They have seen the pictures and they look fabulous. And when they get to the accommodation, it's actually really cold, it's humid, it has black mold. I mean, I don't know, all of those sort of things. And that can be quite shocking to some students who you can contact for help. The first week of university, they are bombarded with so much information that at the end of it, they don't know who's their program leader, who's their personal tutor, how do you contact well-being, who does the catering do? All of these sort of things are really overwhelming to students. So actually to think about those things are really important. Yes, obviously there's restaurants, bars, clubs. If they've done their homework, probably they know these ones. So that's quite good. And what are the customs there? What is it that we do? How is it that we behave? Students find very alien that we ask them to put their camera on when we're having a lesson online, for example, because they're not used to that. Those sort of things kind of are important for them to understand. And therefore, you think about, okay, so if I'm a student and I am going to this new environment, which is, what is it that I need to pack? So some of the things that I'm going to very briefly talk about today is those things that we can support students to pack in their suitcase. So the first one is self-care, because it helps prevent all of these things: burnout, foggy brain, fatigue, weakened immune system, the first flu, the university flu that people get when they get here, all of those sort of things. Making sure that they can take care of themselves is important. And I am talking about the basics. In my book, the Student Wellbeing Toolkit, I was so specific, as in, you need to have a shower once a day. You need to make sure that you brush your teeth twice a day. All of those sort of things, because sometimes students forget, or sometimes students that are in a low mood don't want to do those things. But actually, if they actually take care of themselves and their well-being, that will have a huge impact in the way that they, thrive or survive at university. We can't pour from an empty cup, and that goes also for students. But for them to understand that, sometimes they leave that until the end. Oh, it's not, I don't have to worry about that. So one of the things that I do is I ask my students to create a timetable, and in the timetable put time for self-care, and put time for having lunch, and put time for going out with friends, as important as doing their assignment, because I think that is a key thing for them. work-life balance is really important for that. So well-being obviously is the most important thing that I think we can support students to develop. And well-being is how we judge the way we feel, considering a lot of different areas in our life. So I'm just going to share with you 6 of the areas with one activity I do with my students. And these are the 6 areas. And in my book, I talk about each of them and why they are important. And what this activity that I do is I ask them to rank each of these areas of well-being into high or low, depending of how they're feeling. So for example, in this one, physical well-being is in the middle. Okay, so I would say, okay, why? Oh, I do some sport or I go to the gym, but not every day, so this kind of level. But if I see that socio-emotional well-being is down, I would find out, okay, why, what's happening? How can you get some support there and stuff like that? But for them to be able to identify that is quite important. And so very briefly, because we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to go through some of those things with some ideas of how we can support them. So the first thing I want to do, and the bedrock of everything, is self-awareness. For students to develop self-awareness about, the fact that what they like, what they don't like, what they learn, how they learn, what makes them sad, what makes them angry, how do they react when they're happy, how do they react when they're sad. All of these little things are important. I always say that we are as unique as a fingerprint, inimitable and amazing, and that's all of us. Me included, you included, all of us. And sometimes students forget that. I know some of them find it corny, but I don't really care. I still think it stands. I think it's really important because it is true. But actually, for them to understand who they are, what they want, how they learn is really, really key. We still get students that arrive to university and they don't know that they have additional learning needs. And by not knowing and understanding themselves, they have just wasted about 5 months to be able to receive disability student allowance. Whereas if a student, by the time they come here, they know before they start university, they can actually apply for the right support and have it in place by the time they start university. So those sort of things are really, really important. Another area within self-awareness that is key is developing boundaries. And that's something that sometimes students find difficult to do. And there are all types of boundaries. So actually supporting students to understand them is quite important. There are physical boundaries, there are socio-emotional boundaries, there are verbal boundaries, there are time boundaries, financial boundaries, safety boundaries, and work boundaries, and many, many more. But I actually get them to think about those boundaries, what they mean to them, and how they can develop them. A typical one is financial boundaries, spending your money, their student loan drops, as they call it, on October, and they spend the whole of the money in the first 2 weeks because they don't know that actually the rest of the money won't come until, or if they do know, they forget. So actually thinking about how to protect how you manage your money is really, really important. Safety boundaries, making sure that they are safe and well, being able to manage your emotions properly, being able to manage conflict when you are in a dorm with another 6 people, and someone is really dirty and you're really angry. Those sort of things are really, really important. So one of the activities that I do to support students to develop their boundaries is the limits model that I developed. And I'm going to whiz through it and show it to you. So the first thing I ask them is to label. It's important to label what is it that you want to think about, what is it that you want to create a boundary on, and to identify that very clearly. I then ask them, okay, so how are you going to make this happen? What will it take for it to happen? Is it something that you can control, or is it something out of your control? So if, for example, they're talking about emotional behavior that is inappropriate from someone else, what can they do about that? Is it something they have to say? Is it something they have to be away from? Is there something, those sort of things, to identify what the actual problem is. Who needs to be involved? Does anyone else need to be involved? That's also quite important. Then I actually think that ask them to be mindful and to think about a statement to help them remember that they are not responsible for other people's happiness, that they are not responsible for other people's reaction, and that we cannot control, or they cannot control, what other people think. And again, to focus on what can they do? What is it that me, Camila, today can do to control these for my own well-being, to protect myself? Sometimes people find that really hard to do. It's really difficult if you're not very self-aware to actually know what, but it's important. And the next one is obviously implement it, which is communicating it with the people that you have to, being assertive, being clear, being kind, and being respectful, of course, and being very aware of what is it that is important within that space for others to know. People don't know things if we don't tell them. People may not realize they are really messy if we don't actually say to them, look, every time I pass my wheelchair, I actually, get stuck or whatever. I'm a wheelchair user, so that's why I'm saying it. But, all of those sort of things are really, very important. And the last one, which is hardest, because to create any pathways on our brain, or to create any type of new idea that we can actually make it happen, we need time. And it's the time to practice how we speak, to be patient, to know that we're not going to get it the first time, and to actually be consistent. Someone used to say it takes about 14 or 15 days for a new habit to be formed. I don't know if that is true, but what I do know is that it does take time, but it needs consistency and discipline. If you don't do it with consistency and discipline, it will never happen. If you actually do it every day, it does happen. I've lived it through my own experience in supporting my own mental health and well-being through consistency. Consistency be very, very, very key. Then we're going to briefly move into socio-emotional well-being. Obviously, we need to be happy for everyone to be happy. And I want to talk about socio-emotional intelligence, which is a theory that I developed based on emotional intelligence and social intelligence, and is the ability to integrate feeling, intuition, and cognition to acknowledge, understand, manage, apply, and express our emotions, and to have our social interactions at the right time, with the right person, in the right context. The overall aim is to have a positive impact on our environment and ourselves, and to engage ourselves and others to be present, to be authentic, and to be open. And the overall aim is to have well-being in every aspect of our lives, not just for us, but also for others. So whereas emotional intelligence does not consider always that we are social beings wired to connect, and that every emotion has a social context, because we learned how to express that emotion from someone else, but also every time we express an emotion, it has an impact on others. So I think that's why socio-emotional intelligence is a really key thing to do. So socio-emotional intelligence has many, many, many areas. So I'm just going to briefly mention some of those. Self-awareness, which I think is the bedrock of socio-emotional intelligence, and well-being. Motivation, managing emotion, self-compassion. I used to call self-compassion self-esteem, but I think we shouldn't esteem ourselves. I think we should love ourselves and be compassionate towards ourselves. So I've just put self-compassion there. Within that is self-esteem, obviously. Empathy and social awareness. These are some of those areas. And now I'm just going to briefly go through a few of them and give some ideas of the kind of things we can do to support students to develop in order to be ready for the next stage, whichever stage it is in their lives. You can see I'm getting tired because my English is starting to kind of go away very, very, very slowly. Right, okay. Self-compassion, really important. Words create worlds. The things we tell ourselves, we believe them, even though thoughts are not facts, but we still believe them, which is really powerful. So actually, using positive self-talk is a really important thing to do, and supporting people to learn how to speak about themselves positively. Having positive affirmations about ourselves is also key. Practicing gratitude every morning. I do that every single morning of my life. Self-kindness, really, really important. Self-compassion, self-love, self-kindness, and self-satisfaction. We are so consumed on the next thing, on the next mark, or on the next thing, that sometimes we forget to just be happy with what we have just now. I find myself every time I go on LinkedIn feeling less successful, less intelligent, less capable, because everyone is amazing, is winning prizes, is publishing 55,000 journal articles. It's so overwhelming. So I'm comparing myself and I'm thinking, oh my God, I can breathe. I need to do all these things to be able to actually be satisfied with things. And actually, that's really, really negative. There's a lot of research on positive psychology that actually shows that what makes us happy is not the things that we want, and actually is the things that we have already within ourselves. So it's just looking into that. But that sometimes is hard when I know that young people, all of us, but young people are being bombarded all the time to look a certain way, to buy a certain piece of clothing, to speak in a specific way, to behave in a way. So it's really, really important to kind of get them out of that and think about their own selves, what works for them, what makes them happy, how to be happy without shame, because I think that's quite important. An activity that I sometimes do about this is when you catch yourself saying something unkind, ask yourself, would I say this to someone I love? Would I say this to my husband? Would I say this to my children? If I wouldn't, why am I saying this to myself? I spend the most time in the day with myself. I should be kind to myself and be loving towards myself. That doesn't mean we have to be like with an ego bigger than our head. It's not about that, but it's about acknowledging that, we are worthy and we are enough and we are amazing. And those things are really, really important. Right, okay. So the other thing that actually has been one of the issues that we've seen after COVID is social awareness, developing social connections, knowing that we are better together. Social awareness is the way in which we see the world and understand the world around us. And for students, this is really important. But it's also about how we manage our relationship and the way that we interpret social cues, body language, so on and so forth. Obviously, there is an aspect around neurodivergent people that may have some certain limitations towards that. But overall, people and younger people, in my experience from students that I work with, they don't speak on the phone anymore. They don't speak to each other. Sometimes you see them in the class and they're on their phone texting each other in the same room, and we forget that as humans, we survived Neanderthals because we have social and cultural knowledge and understanding. We helped each other, we supported each other. And that's something that when students arrive is really hard to do, to the point that getting students to work in groups, in the majority of cases, is actually painful because they don't know how to work in a team. And it's actually quite worrying because when they go into the workplace, who cares if they can write an essay, but they need them to work with other people. So those sort of skills that we want them to learn at university, for when they go, they should actually be practicing. It's really hard for them. I completely understand. Through the pandemic, people had for a couple of years, especially at very important time. I'm seeing the students coming to university this year and last year, where they couldn't meet their friends. They didn't know where to go and meet friends. Nowadays, people make friends online very easily. So it's difficult. I understand that. But we need to make sure that we support them to realize how important that is, because it will help them. From an intellectual point of view and from a cognitive point of view, something that we use at university and probably you guys also use at in schools is Bloom's taxonomy. And for these, I want to talk about not how people learn in the way of someone being a visual learner, because we now know that is actually not a realistic thing, because we all learn in different ways depending on the context. So we can be sometimes better at learning how by hearing, sometimes by speaking, sometimes by doing, sometimes by watching. It doesn't mean that we are specifically one way or another. But what we want students to learn is metacognition, is learning about learning how they learn better, learning what are the things that you need to learning about the brain and how it works and how cognition happens, so that they get an idea. And also to practice some of the skills that they will have to use in their new environment. So academic writing, referencing, even if it's a different type of referencing. If you've gone to university, you know that there is a specific way that people, write in those things. Get students to read journal articles and to talk about them, for example. That is a really good way to introduce them to those sort of things. Time management is a huge one that we get. The students really don't know how to manage their time, especially at university. They have a lot of what they call free time, which it isn't free, really. It's a time for studying and looking after themselves. And they struggle when they have so many hours where they just don't have input. They don't know what to do with themselves. So actually supporting them to become more self-efficacious and more self-reliant and independent learners is really, really key to university. University can be a lonely experience, especially for people doing, for example, PhDs. So it's important for people to have that resilience and that ability to be okay to be by themselves and to learn by themselves as well as in groups. And the terminology, which some of it we have talked about, but some of the learning outcomes that we actually give our students are based on Bloom's taxonomy. So they will have to, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, all of those sort of things. So for them to understand those things and what they mean is really, really key to be able to actually support them in the transition to university. So another thing we can do is we can expose them to these, I'm calling them foreign concepts because they are very difficult for them sometimes to grasp. Making mistakes and seeing them as opportunities for growth. Our students are petrified of making mistakes. They are petrified of not being perfect. But the truth is, no one is perfect. And perfection is overrated. Believe me, I am a recovering perfectionist. And it's taken me actually a lot of brain power to realize that it's okay. It's absolutely okay to make mistakes. Probably some of the most incredible experiments in the universe or whatever, people that have won Nobel Prizes, they made quite a few mistakes before they found that cure or whatever. So it's important for students to understand that mistakes are okay. Unfortunately, because we are so geared in our education system around exams, if they fail the exam, their life is over. So it's that not catastrophizing things and staying perspectives that is important. Finding validation from others, which we know is futile. Trying new things or different things, dare I say, sometimes it's really difficult for people to do. I've had students absolutely say to me, I am not going to work in a group with those people because I don't know them. So it's actually exposing them to that is, we're all different, we all come in different ways, we all have different accents and different, and actually we will have to mix with everyone. So that's important. Embracing difficult things, learning to resolve conflict is a really important and a really big one that we see quite a lot. And as an adult, it didn't come easy to me to learn to resolve conflict. I come from Colombia in South America, and it's a very patriarchal society. And as a woman, I was never allowed to then have an opinion. So there was never conflict because I wasn't allowed. And when I actually I learned that I had a voice and that it was okay. I had to actually have to learn to manage and resolve conflicts for those that thought that I didn't have a voice, for example. Receiving and giving feedback, people find that really hard. And in education and in academia, you will receive feedback all the time. And sometimes people will be harsher than others, and being able to not take it personally is a really, really important skill. Rejection is another one that is important. And learning with and about others, which I've mentioned, setting boundaries and sticking to them, which we just covered, developing assertiveness, practicing self-compassion, gaining perspective by exploring different views, and knowing, yeah, that perfection is overrated. So there's now a reflective moment where I want to ask you, based on your knowledge, your understanding, you are all experts of what you do. You know your students well. You know what they're about. What will you share with them to take on their journey? So I just want you to think about, what will you share with them to take on their journey so that they can not just survive, but thrive and flourish. So before I finish, I just want to briefly a plug, because why not? It took me a long to write, and it's my favorite baby, all of my babies. I have lots of exercise tips and ideas in my book, The Student Wellbeing Toolkit. As I said, it was a labor of love. I absolutely adored not just writing it, but bringing it into the world, because it's the sum of all my knowledge of my 25 years as an educator, but also because I want this book to make a difference to the students. I want them to feel that they can thrive, that they can come, and if they develop those skills, it's going to be awesome. Before we go on questions, I just want to leave you with my final thoughts. I hope you indulge me on this. And it is basically, consistency is key to develop daily habits, and that goes for us, but also for other people. We need to try different things to find out what works, and that goes also for us. We need to remember to stop and enjoy the ride. That is really, really important for us as well, and how we work with our students. It is such a gratifying thing. I think it's really difficult when you love what you do and when you actually see those students flourish, the joy that represents. So enjoying that moment and relishing in that moment when you're seeing them flourish, graduate, whatever, do well in an assignment, send you an email back saying they got a job, or whatever, is such a fabulous thing to remind you. Not only that you're doing your job well and you care, but actually that we are all changing lives, which is fabulous. I've said that before, perfection is overrated. We should trust our practical wisdom. Aristotle talked about practical wisdom, which is doing the right thing at the right time for the right purpose. Not always right and wrong are the same thing. Sometimes you need to put nuance and context to a situation. And I think trusting that as educators or academics or whatever we do, supporting students is really, really important. This nuance, personalization. And something that we really sometimes forget, and is to remember that you may be the role model and the only role model that they have or they need. That person, for me, that person was my first university teacher. I was the only person in my class. I was a mature student with 2 kids, and I was the only person in my class with English as a second language. So I was petrified, especially because I had to do an interview to do my course to study to be a teacher, and I had to do an interview, and the lady that interviewed me had a really strong Scottish accent. And at the end of the interview, I thought it had gone really well. And she asked me something. And for the life of me, I still don't know what it was. And I just smiled and said yes. And I left the room and I thought, oh my God, she could have been saying to me, it's really hot. Your skirt is showing something. I didn't know what was happening there. And it was really, really horrible. I thankfully got a place. But anyway, this same teacher I had, when I first became disabled in the last year of my university, she believed in me so much that she brought me books to hospital to help me finish my dissertation so I could graduate. And it is because of Shirley, because of her, that I do what I do. And I never, ever forget the way that she believed in me, supported me. Also, she was an amazing person. She is an amazing person that knows, she's like a walking encyclopedia, passionate and all of the things. And I've always tried to emulate that and be like her. And in fact, my next book that comes in April, The Flourishing Academic, is dedicated to her because she changed my life, and I will forever be grateful. So yes, that's it. These are my references. Obviously, as an academic, I have to have them. Thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry my voice got a bit croaky, but I'm really glad I could share my passion with you guys. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen now.
Right. Thank you so much, Camilla, for a very insightful presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure our attendees did as well.